So thanks for being here, everyone. My name is Kim Porter. I'm the Executive Director of Be a Part of the Conversation. I want to thank our community partner, the Montgomery County Office of Drug and Alcohol. We have a beautiful, long relationship with the county, and I'm very grateful for their support. This program is being recorded, but I want you to know that as participants, your names will not be seen on the recording, or any questions that you ask also will only be seen by the panelists who are with us tonight. But please go ahead and submit any of those questions whenever you like as they come up throughout the program. We will have a section at the end at that time set aside for Q&A. So please go ahead and do that. I'm also joined by Judy Hirsch, also with Be a Part of the Conversation. And Judy and I will be kind of keeping an eye on things to make sure any questions that come up are answered as best as we can. At the end of this program, you will see a survey pop up on the screen. It's like a prompt to click on a link to take our survey. Please do take a moment to do that. I appreciate it so much when you do this, because even if you've been with us before, we love to hear feedback about these individual programs, whether or not they were helpful, if there are any topics in the future that you would like to hear from us. We really love to hear from you. So please, please, please share your thoughts on that survey. We will have a follow-up page to this program. It is on our website, which is conversation.zone, and /alcohol is where you'll find the follow-up for this. So the recording of this program will be there, as well as the PowerPoints that Karen Levin and Karen Moser and I are sharing. And you'll also find lots of other supportive information, a few things that we'll be referring to in the program. And thank you, Karen, for sending me those links that I added earlier today, specifically about women and alcohol. And so, as I mentioned, you're going to hear from Karen Moser in a little while, and you'll also hear from Claire Valentine, who is a person in recovery from alcohol use disorder. We're very grateful to both of these wonderful women for being here this evening. I want to mention a program that we have coming up next week on Thursday. Is it really June already next week? I'm kind of shocked by this myself, but on June 2nd, we'll be talking about recovery housing. This is something that came from our parent partnership meetings. We've been hearing from folks that there's just a lot of confusion around this. You know, what are these different levels of structure? What's the difference between a halfway house, a sober house, a recovery house, you know, all that sort of thing. And so we're going to hear from a lot of different folks who have different perspectives on this, and some lived experience as well. So I hope that you'll join us for this really, I think, going to be very interesting program. There's other stuff coming up that I don't have listed here yet, and that haven't even been put on our calendar yet. We have at least two more programs scheduled for June that I hope you'll join us for. But also want to give a shout out to, as I just mentioned, Parent Partnership. These are meetings take place throughout the region, both virtually and in person. And here's a calendar that shows how many there are. The green buttons are Zoom meetings, and the purple buttons are in person. Wednesday night in Hapro, that's my gang. And I can tell you that we really need each other. I'm a parent of somebody in recovery, and so is Judy. And we really, we just benefit so much by connecting with other family members who've been down this road. So I hope you'll visit this section of our website and learn more about Parent Partnership. And Judy is sharing all these links in the chat for you. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about the subject this evening, and really just bringing our attention to the fact that women in particular are targeted a lot in advertising throughout history. This is nothing new, but it's just sort of, this contributes a lot to, this is what women do, this is what our culture accepts, this is how I'm social, this is how I connect with other women. And there are even products that target women in a really kind of creative way, I guess we could say. These are flasks that look like tampons. These are things, you know, thanks to Etsy and Amazon and all these, you can find this stuff just about anywhere. And again, just culturally, in popular culture, certainly, you know, Sex and the City, the Cosmopolitan really had a huge surge in popularity because of this show. Just, you know, lots of, again, you know, reinforcement, validation. This is okay. This is part of culture, right? So when women are hearing this repeatedly and feeling maybe that they're whatever amount of alcohol they're drinking, that it's totally acceptable, right? This one really blew my mind. These are wine pairings for Girl Scout cookies. So we have a whole nother program about underage drinking, and this is not helping. So I hope that, if you're an adult who's over 21 and is able to drink in moderation, absolutely no judgment here on drinking, but it's just, let's be thoughtful about what's being posted on social media, the way we describe drinking or talk about drinking in front of our young people. So just had to make a little note about that with regard to kids and their modeling our behaviors. So my background's in marketing, and I've known about this rule for a very long time, but it especially applies to industries such as the alcohol industry, tobacco industry, fast food, and some other things. And then now actually the cannabis industry has gotten into this. And the rule is that 80% of that industry's patrons, 80% of their product is being consumed by 20% of their consumers, of the people who use their product. So whether it's, McDonald's, whether it's cigarettes, whatever, but alcohol is absolutely a part of this. So that means the alcohol industry, all those ads you just saw, they're going after 20% of the people who drink alcohol, because they know that this is the population that is going to keep them in business and keep things moving. Just a little bit of reference points here, as far as the amount of substances of alcohol being consumed. So the blue bars are showing current alcohol use. This is from 2020. And the red bars are showing heavy alcohol use. It's pretty consistent throughout life, but this gray section is the underage drinking. So you can see, obviously not too surprising that it does creep up pretty rapidly or steadily until you get to the legal age of 21. So certainly it's being consumed underage. I can tell you that this is just showing 1 year, but I can tell you that the trend is going down for underage drinking, which is really good news. Alcohol use, binge drinking in particular, drinking and driving, these things have all been steadily decreasing in the under 18 population. I don't have a lot of data with me on 18 to 25, like that college age or that range of ages, but I believe it's still pretty prevalent. Cannabis is kind of creeping up on this territory a little bit with underage, but just a little context there. And I just threw in this information about opioid overdose deaths, and we actually just got new data on 2021. The number, very sadly, is even higher than this now. But we pay a lot of attention, as we should, to opioid use disorder because of this high mortality rate, because of the rapid onset of opioid use disorder. It comes along a lot more quickly than other substances, including alcohol. But what I want to point out is deaths due to alcohol-related disease actually surpassed opioid deaths in 2020. In 2021, I believe opioid deaths are overtaking alcohol-related deaths now. But just to make this point that alcohol use disorder may not be as quickly responsible for someone's death, but it can absolutely contribute to a lot of things. And here's kind of a breakdown of those alcohol-related deaths. So you can see that liver disease is the greatest contributor, but there are many other reasons, and things like that are more dramatic that we might think of, like car crashes, really only make up a really relatively small portion of this. Suicide is in here, pretty predominant number there too as well. So heart disease, we'll be talking a little bit more about that. But what is alcohol use disorder? It is like many other substance use disorders, other addictions. It's basically continued use despite adverse consequences, negative consequences. So we'll be talking with some folks who are going to talk more about, this progression, right? About how it's when you get this new normal of things that are starting to happen, when does your comfort level with those uncomfortable things change and perhaps lead into an alcohol use disorder or alcoholism? A risk factor for alcohol use disorder is the earlier onset of use. So if we can delay the onset of use, again, by modeling, really healthy behaviors in front of our kids, not referring to alcohol as something that's going to help me with my stress or my bad day or my anxiety of going to a social situation. We know that younger people when people start drinking younger, they have a much greater risk of developing any kind of substance use disorder. Genetics plays a really huge part in this. In fact, 60% of our likelihood for developing any kind of addiction is genetics, is related to genetics. So taking a look at the family tree, there might even be addictive behaviors that aren't related to substances that might actually also be a bit of a precursor or a predictor of some substance use challenges. And then, of course, again, those drinking patterns exhibited by parents can also be increase that risk. Mental health conditions, a history of trauma, not surprisingly, I'm sure to most of us, can really contribute to the risk factors as well. So how many people are drinking? This is looking at, from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, people over 18. So not necessarily of legal age, but just their study looked at over 18-year-olds. In their lifetime, 85.6% of us have had alcohol at some point. Looking at just past month use over 18, that would be roughly 55% of people have used alcohol in the past month, consumed alcohol, I should say. So this is another survey. The National Center for Health Statistics looked at past year alcohol consumption. A third of us didn't drink anything in the past year. And you can look at this helps to explain, again, my slide deck and this recording will all be available if you want to take a closer look at this, but this helps you to see the amount of alcohol we're talking about. Only 5%, not only, but 5% are drinking heavily, which means for women, that's 7 or more drinks a week. Okay, that's considered heavy drinking. So in the United States, here's a breakdown of what that means for a drink. So we're talking about beer, 12 ounces, wine, 5 ounces, liquor, 1.5 ounces. And I only have this is this kind of, it's been around for a while, the Jelinek curve. It helps to explain substance use and how substance use develops. And this would be like the perhaps cycle of a return to use and then the subsequent recovery. And the reason I'm sharing this is I think with alcohol in particular, it's interesting to look at progression because as I mentioned earlier, it can take a longer time for problems to arise. Somebody can be able to drink moderately for a number of years and perhaps even be in their 40s, 50s, 60s and really start seeing some changes in their life that they're using the alcohol in an alcoholic way. Like if they're drinking no longer in moderation. And this can be a very slippery slope. It's harder to see that progression when you're in it. And I can say from personal experience as well, I have a dad my dad is 90 now, and he got sober at 66. He was not in alcohol for that 40 years before he got sober. He was drinking moderately. And then the last 10, 15 years, it became hugely problematic, and he found recovery at 66. And so now he's got 24 years of sobriety, which is amazing. So it is very, very progressive though, in most cases, or in many cases. We have this checklist on our website. If you just want to take a look at this to see, it comes from the Diagnostic Statistics Manual to look at what are some of the signs that there might be an alcohol use disorder. So you'll find that form there if you want to take a look. And again, I'm not going to spend much time on each of these slides, but alcohol affects many parts of the body. We often think of the liver, but it absolutely can impact brain, heart. There's the liver, the pancreas. It can actually increase risks of certain cancers. And your immune system. And my goodness, right now with this COVID pandemic, we do not need a weakened immune system. This is really important for us. So other conditions like mental health and digestive issues and high blood pressure, STDs, of course, lots of other things that can be problematic. And I know people love to look for what is it good for, right? Like I heard it helps, with heart disease and things like that. Well, we can cherry pick that kind of stuff all day long, but the reality is there are an awful lot of problems, especially with when use becomes beyond moderate use. So once you stop drinking alcohol, if you make that choice, there are lots of good things that can happen. The body can heal and can repair. In fact, you can have a lot of other benefits, better looking skin, who doesn't want, all these beautiful things like healthier weight and improved immunity and lower risk of all the things that we just talked about. There are medications to help with recovery from alcohol use disorder, such as naltrexone. The injectable is best known as Vivitrol, but there's also an oral that's used quite often for alcohol use disorder. There's acamprosate, also known as Campril, and disulfiram, which is also known as Antabuse. These are all prescribed medications that can help with the cravings of alcohol. They are not addictive. Also, there are plenty of opportunities for talk therapy. We have a therapist with us tonight who folks like Karen Moser can definitely help us out with how we got here to this alcohol use disorder. And of course, there's tried and true, 12-step programs like Alcoholics Anonymous, other programs like Smart Recovery, Recovery Dharma. There are faith-based programs like Celebrate Recovery. These are just, can be a beautiful way to support the help that you might be getting from some of these other modalities like therapy, like inpatient treatment, like outpatient treatment, like an intensive outpatient program, things like that. These groups can be a real fortification for the work that we're doing individually. And I just want to make a really important note here that if someone is truly addicted to alcohol, when they stop drinking alcohol, they are at great risk of detox. So this can be, actually, there are only two substances that are truly put your life at risk when you stop using them. One is alcohol and the other is benzodiazepines. Opioid use, people will often talk about the horrific detox that is and how painful and uncomfortable it is feeling flu-like. It rarely causes, a life-threatening, compromising someone's life. Unless there's a really weakened heart or something like that. But alcohol and benzodiazepines can be very dangerous to detox from without medical support. So COVID what hasn't COVID changed in our lives, right? But this is one of them. And again, here we have, lots of posts on social media that just really, again, just validate the use, trying to make light of it. I mean, my goodness, look at this, come on, homeschooling and fractions with wine. It's just out there. So taking a look, this is from 2020. I have to tell you, I had a hard time finding a lot of data on where use is now in 2022, but there were so many studies done at the end of 2020 because it became evident pretty quickly that use was going up. We knew this from, again, the industry. We knew that sales, if you remember, you couldn't buy, people weren't going to bars. So there was all this movement to make it so that you could buy a drink from a bar and take it home, get it delivered to you. There's something called Drizzly that has, they deliver alcohol. In Pennsylvania, you can only have beer delivered to your home, kind of like Grubhub, but only beer is allowed to be delivered to the home at this point. But there is some pending legislation that might allow hard liquor and wines to be delivered as well. But in other states, businesses like Drizzly that deliver alcohol went through the roof. Sales went through the roof. So a lot of these studies were done to see what was happening. So you can see that there was definitely an increase in alcohol consumption. And this study from the Journal of American Medical Association showed that overall consumption of alcohol went up 14% in 2020. But this section down here, these all represent increases in women in alcohol use. So this is really disconcerting, 41% increase in heavy drinking among women. Who knows what the reasons might be? I think it's twofold. Certainly not surprising that it might be stress. I think a lot of women, unfortunately, there's still some gender differences in the way you raise children. Women tend to carry the burden of quite a lot of homeschooling. Maybe they're teachers themselves. They're multitasking. They're doing so much. So perhaps it's been stress, but also perhaps it's been wanting to feel like it's normal and we're going to socialize or we're going to pretend like we're socializing. This was just an article that I posted about, some of the potential contributing factors. And then finally, I just wanted to make a note that, not everyone who is recognizing an increase in their alcohol use has alcohol use disorder. there are ways to cut back, and there's a whole movement now on being sober curious. We're seeing more and more things that look like a bar that are actually zero proof bars, so that there's it's like the mocktails and things like that. These can be challenging for people who are truly trying to abstain from alcohol use, and mocktail isn't the best thing to kind of play with your head a little bit, that this looks and feels a lot like a, margarita, but it isn't a margarita, so it's a challenge for, I think, for people who truly need to abstain, have decided they want to abstain from alcohol use. But there is possibility for moderation in some cases, and there are lots of apps that are supporting that. Just wanted to make that note. So that is all that I have. And now I'm happy to introduce you to Karen Levin. Karen Moser, I'm sorry, I'm so—
That's okay, I go by
right off the tongue. Karen Moser, how are you? Thanks for being here.
I'm good. Thanks, Kim. Great intro. And I'm going to share my screen now and put up some slides that I prepared.
I didn't read your bio, Karen, so can you tell folks a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Let me
Thanks.
just make sure that I'm doing this. Can you guys see it? I need to put it in the right format. Hold on one second. Hold on, I need to present. Can you guys see it?
Perfect.
Okay, good. Yeah, so I am Karen Levin Moser. I do have a lot of background in working in the addictions field. That's where I started my career. I currently do outpatient private practice, but I am one of the old heads. I started in 1993 working in inpatient rehab, and then went to intensive outpatient, dual diagnosis, and now do a lot of like longer term recovery work with folks. I'm also a person in long-term recovery. And I teach at Bryn Mawr College, the substance abuse course. So this is one of my areas of interest. I am aware that COVID has changed everything. And, one of the things that's changed is, our use of substances. And, people medicate with substances, and that is a reality. So here we are. So what I wanted to do, we're going to talk today a little bit about what's different about women, because there are some differences between how alcohol impacts women versus men, and how can we help? Because I know that the risk factors are there, and oftentimes people have questions on whether or not it really is a problem. Social drinking is something that people do, and it does cross the line. It's very tricky. Like you said, Kim, alcohol is a little bit more of a slow burn, and oftentimes people are developing a problem and they don't realize it. And that is what makes it difficult. So some differences in the risk factors with women, that women with alcohol issues may be more apt to self-medicate. They may be medicating anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem. And the studies have found that women are more likely to drink to escape or self-medicate. And that might be what we're seeing with the COVID numbers. So the medical risks, you talked some about these, Kim. But one of the differences between men and women is that alcohol metabolizes differently in women. And one of the reasons is because we have a higher fat content in our body. And so what happens is that the percentage of the alcohol in the body is greater for women when they take a drink than for men who metabolize it more quickly. And so what that can cause is that dependence on alcohol can progress more quickly with women. And that's called telescoping. So compared to men, that women can start drinking at a later age and develop a problem more quickly and with a shorter use of time. And that's a phenomena that just, I think, relates to the difference in metabolizing in terms of the body. they have increased heart disease, breast cancer, and it does impact the endocrine health. And then when you think about as you get older, cognitive and physical decline is greater with use of alcohol. So, and here's, when Kim and I were originally talking about this presentation, I was thinking a lot about what I call the Madonna effect, that women are seen as the mother and the person who's supposed to take care of everybody. And what happens when that person develops a problem with alcohol? It's almost like women carry additional shame about their drinking because, you're supposed to be this person who cares about everyone, and you're supposed to be a perfect mom to your kids. And what about, I've treated women who have gotten DUIs with 4 children in the car. 2 of them are not their own children. They're belonging to other people if it's a carpool. And that is a lot of shame for someone to carry. And oftentimes you would think that people, someone who's in that position is going to go like run off to get some help. But that doesn't always happen that way because the shame is really hard to face. And so often people go underground at that point with their drinking and also start isolating from other people if something like that happens. So this whole mother, female connection is a big deal for moms who drink. And then I also have noticed that women who are not mothers, who are substance users, still carry shame because, we're socialized to be kind and caring, and someone who's actually actively drinking and or using drugs is not that way when you're under the influence, or when you're under the influence, you're not your best self with other people. And so this idea of what is perfection as a female doesn't fit into the use of alcohol. So if there's a problem, what do you do? And I thought a lot about wanting to just clarify, sort of like giving you some tips on how to approach it if you think someone has a problem. And the first step is to get help with diagnosis. And I don't expect everyone to know how to do this. That's our job in the treatment field. But the first line of defense is answering one of those substance abuse questionnaires. They're the one that you have on your website, Kim, is great. And if you think it's a loved one, because oftentimes people are doing this thing in the middle of the night online, they're concerned about their behavior, and they're going to take one of these tests, but they're not going to tell anybody about it. You might tell your best friend, but typically what happens is people don't get help until there's a problem, until something has happened. I was working with someone recently who had an incident where she was embarrassed about her use. She had to be driven home by a friend. And that was the tipping point for her. That was the thing that said, okay, I can't do this anymore. I need to address this. And, so oftentimes we get calls from those folks, they enter in and they might not mention their drinking first. I had somebody who mentioned depression first. And if I didn't ask the question about drinking, I might not have gotten that answer. So, oftentimes this is the thing that goes underground because people are having a hard time facing it themselves. So the diagnosis is thinking about, so binge drinking is very different, as you mentioned, Kim, than daily drinking, right? So if somebody's drinking every single day, multiple times throughout the day, or even if it's like you wait until the evening and then you drink a bottle or two of wine a day, your body is dependent on it. It starts to become, it's an anticipatory response. Binge drinking can cause that, but it's not a medical problem. But a daily drinking issue is something that you really want to suss out and help someone get into an inpatient program to detox safely. And again, oftentimes we're more nervous about somebody's use than the person who's actually drinking is, until something drastic happens, right? So one of the ways that I learned, and we don't use this as much anymore, but this is sort of like a quick diagnosis tool that I use. So you think about the beginning of substance use is episodic use. So like, let's say you go drinking at a party, maybe you're a younger person who's just starting to have a few with friends. And that might happen once or twice, maybe a month or not even that much. It's not something you depend on. It's not something you think about. It's just, if it's there, you do it. And then the next one, you kind of like, if you start to like the way it feels, and people who become problem drinkers or alcoholics will tell you the minute they picked up the drink, they felt different. Average people don't notice that total mental shift like someone who potentially has a problem with alcohol does. And so you'll hear people in retrospect tell you that, when they enter into treatment, like, I knew when I had that first drink, I loved the way it made me feel. And so those people are going to be the ones that might go from episodic use to self-medicative use a little bit more quickly. And sometimes people also can take it or leave it socially for long periods of time, and then maybe have a death in the family or something else that happens that catapults their use into another category because they start self-medicating, and then self-medication with habit and becomes habitual, becomes alcohol abuse. And then we used to, when we taught it this way, say there's like this invisible line of demarcation that you cross into dependency on alcohol. And especially with alcohol, this happens slowly over time with most people. And then one day people will say, oh, I switched from beer to vodka, or I switched from wine to hard liquor, because at the time they didn't think about it, but from a medical point of view, we would tell you they needed more concentration of alcohol to get the desired effect that they wanted. And then that makes it harder to avoid dependency because the body just starts to physiologically anticipate it. And so that's sort of like my best, look at how it progresses. And again, the online resources are great, because if you think you have a problem, if anybody is on this call thinking they have a problem, take a test and just be honest with yourself about the results, and then think about who you want to talk to about it. Okay, so the hardest thing to do is to confront someone when you think there's a problem. And it would be better if we didn't think about it as confrontation. So I'm going to retract that word. If you think about it as expressing concern to a person who you care about, it's a lot easier to have a discussion. And so what you want to do is, if you think somebody has a problem with alcohol, honestly express your concerns with observations, because you are the video camera for your loved one. They can't see themselves when they're under the influence. They're not able to see what it looks like from the outside, or how it feels different to be in their presence. And so it's really important, if you care about someone, to just share honestly about it. But you also want to be careful not to judge, because again, this is something that people have internalized stigmatization. We think about, and this will be like, when I work with people who have alcohol problems, they'll say, well, I'm not one of those, I'm not an alcoholic. That word carries a lot of stigma. And in fact, in the academic community, we've kind of moved away from using that word. In the 12-step community, we still use it. And, in the 12-step community, we use it because it's that moment of surrender is important. That moment of surrender of like, okay, I have a problem. I'm one of those. But the word alcoholic doesn't have to be a dirty word. You can use problem drinker if you want. You can refer to yourself however you want. No, there's no rule about using the word alcoholic. And also, you know, because people are more informed about this issue, they're getting help earlier. So oftentimes, you know, in the old days when Alcoholics Anonymous started, the people who were ending up in AA had really scraped the bottom of the barrel with their behavior. Whereas now we're more educated and we're more likely to identify the problem earlier. So what happens when someone in your life has a problem? It's often that you might be angry with them, you might be disappointed, you may have been let down by them. So that's one of the areas you want to like kind of put that aside for a moment and have that we call it responsible concern conversation. You know, if I care about you and love you, I'm going to be honest with you, kind of deal. And it's important also that you use I statements and not like you did this. Say, you know, when I was with you, I was aware that you were having a problem, you were slurring your words, and I was sad, or I was upset to see you in that condition, or, you know, you want to be vulnerable with that person about what it was like to be you, and not point the finger at them, because they're more likely to hear you if you approach it that way, because you want to avoid increasing someone's defensiveness about their behavior. And then the other thing I would say as someone in this line of work is timing is everything. So if something happens where you have a concern about someone, try to have the courage to confront them as soon as you can, because that incident will be forgotten. And, you know, someone could be in a blackout too when it happens. So you don't want to have to like say, oh, you remember 6 months ago when you did da 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 da, you know, like you want to, like, if something happens, and intervention is an option too, which is a process where you get a clinician involved. But if it's just friend to friend or family member to family member, you can do it that way. And if the person is receptive to getting help, then you go with it. And again, it's very courageous to do this, and important too for the relationship. So treatment options: when in doubt, seek help. And these are the various options. You know, if someone isn't drinking every day, and again, we don't always know that. That's the problem, because, you know, people aren't going to tell you how much they're drinking. And, you know, by the time it gets to be a problem, usually people are hiding it. They're hiding bottles, or they're telling themselves lies about how much they're drinking, right? But going to an individual therapist, someone like me, or as a family, or as, you know, even dragging a friend with you, you know, say, I want to go sit down with someone with you, because let's talk about what's going on. And then the next step would be a formal outpatient treatment program, inpatient treatment program, intensive outpatient, which meets a number of times a week, which is a really good option for someone who's binge drinking, by the way, because, you know, binge drinker, if you can cover them more days a week, they're more likely to have success with not drinking. Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, I like to have people try an AA meeting. You know, some people have like, oh, well, I'm not an alcoholic, or I don't like the God thing. But I just ask people, go and kind of either, well, now we can go online. You know, I tell people you can go online anywhere in the world. You know, I tell people, pick a big city. That's probably a better option for the first meeting, because you have likely to have more variety of people. But you can offer to go with someone if it's an open meeting too. And I always just tell my clients, sit your butt in a chair and just listen and see if it relates to you. And then we always ask people to try a number of meetings, because it really depends on, you know, who's in the room, what their story is, as to whether or not you relate. Celebrate Recovery that you mentioned, Kim, that's a really good option. There's, you know, I was at a conference a while ago where A guy who wrote a book a long time ago challenged those of us in the treatment field, like, look, there are a lot of things happening in the community that are meeting people's needs better sometimes than inpatient treatment or outpatient treatment. Celebrate Recovery is one of them. It's a church-based program where if your church is offering it and that's something you're curious about, just go. It's a community. So that the point is that people, when they do this on their own, they don't do as well, because people isolate when they're problem drinking. They don't tell anybody what they're doing, and they do the behavior by themselves. And you mentioned Sober Curious. I think it's a great movement that's starting, and Women in Recovery is also available. And there's also some other online, like Rational Recovery, so there's so many things that have popped up over time that if you think it's something that you want to try out, just do it, and see if you can find your tribe of people who want to change. So here's the last words I'll leave you with is some things to consider. If your loved one agrees with you that they have a problem, it's not necessarily that they accept that they do. So that's why I say agreement's not acceptance. It's like, my clients will yes me to death sometimes before they actually make a change, because they know they need to. It's not about me or anything else. It's more about how hard it is to change. And ambivalence is the name of the game, because who wants to have this problem? No one wants to believe that they have a problem with alcohol or other substances. They like the way it makes them feel, and they're going to continue to do it until there is some sort of like tipping of the scale. And in the stages of change, that's something you can look up. I'm not going to go through that right now. But it does take time to make a change. And usually people are in what we call contemplation for some time. And that's the ambivalence. It's like, well, I know I need to, but I don't know that I want to. It's going back and forth about it. And one of the reasons people go back and forth is because of the internalized social stigma about having an alcohol problem and the shame about being an alcoholic. And then the other one is losing the privilege to drink socially. Most people still want to drink socially if they've decided they have a problem, so, and then going to social occasions and all of that, people have to make plans on how they're going to handle that. But, one of the things that we say is that, you do the work to get stable so that you can go out and about socially again. And you do that with some wisdom and care. So hopefully that was helpful. And I'm going to turn it over to Claire.
That was awesome, Karen. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
I have some notes I'm going to come and follow up on. But yes, Claire, thank you so much for being here. If you could unmute and say hello.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am Claire. I'm an alcoholic. And I will just start with my sobriety date, tell you a little bit about what it was like, what happened, and then what it's like today. I'll give you a little preview. I got sober through the 12 steps and Alcoholics Anonymous. I maintain my sobriety that way. So for me, that's been the path that I've taken. So my sobriety date's August 24th, 2007. So this summer I'll be coming up on 15 years if all goes well. I have not found a good enough reason to pick up a drink since then, which has been a relief. When we talk about this nature versus nurture, like how much of this was in my genetics and how much of this was in my environment. For me, it was both. It's a little different for everyone, but for sure, I think that I had have the genetic predisposition to be an alcoholic. When I look at my family, it's abundantly obvious. And then, in my formative years, I had some challenges and turned to alcohol and found a lot of relief there. So when I was, I grew up in like ostensibly a normal family outside of Pittsburgh. My dad was very successful, workaholic, worked really hard. And my mom was kind of like home with the kids and was that drunk mom. And I didn't know anything about this. I didn't know about alcohol. I didn't know about alcoholism. I just knew things were really weird in my family. And kids have a tendency to internalize that. And so I thought, what's wrong is me. And I have to kind of like be careful because whatever's going on here is probably because there's something wrong with me. And that really affected my self-esteem. No one talked about the problems. No one mentioned my mom's drinking. In fact, when she was drunk, my dad would say that she was smoking too many cigarettes. I mean, it was, it's just not the way we handle things today. But when I was 10, she went off to treatment, and I visited her in the rehab, and I went to an AA meeting when I was 10 there at her rehab. And I got enough information there to know that this is a family disease and that I could be vulnerable to this. My mom was not able to stay sober after that. She never kind of took responsibility for the problem. And when I was 14, she had a really bad relapse. My dad moved out, and, within a year, I was drinking myself, smoking pot, shoplifting, became sexually active. Like it all just, went crazy for me. At the same time, I didn't like to get in trouble. I like to fly under the radar. I didn't like to attract too much negative attention. And some of that is child of alcoholic stuff, where you just like make everything seem fine, whatever's going on, everything's fine. And the anxiety, and I remember having panic attacks when I was like 12 and 13. I mean, it was pretty bad, and no one offered help and no one talked to me about it. So when I could get my hands on alcohol, even though I knew that was what was going on in my house, that was the problem. Once I took a drink, I felt so much better. And, when you're a kid, there's limited access to alcohol. I definitely remember my first drunk by the time I was 12 or 13, my first blackout by the time I was 14. But getting our hands on alcohol was like, you'd have to wait till somebody's older sister or older brother had it, or you'd steal some from, somebody's parent. But I knew, like, if I'm honest with myself now, I knew from an early age that I had a special relationship with that stuff. And I wanted to do whatever I could to get more of it. And so right from the beginning, if I had some, I wanted more. And we know now that there's this like allergy. It's like a physical manifestation of, it triggers a craving in me. And then it also triggers a mental obsession where I just think about it. I want to get it. I want to have more of it. I want to plan the next time I have it. And then have to recover from it. So another sort of cycle that started for me was latching onto boyfriends. So I had this like wanting to drink all the time and then wanting to engage in codependency so that I could have somebody tell me what to do and how to live and sort of be this parent. So I would drink, and then the boyfriend would not like the way I got when I drank, and then I would swear it off. And I mean, I did this the first time when I was probably 15 or 16, and was just like a dry drunk for like a year in high school, which was awful. And then went off to college and was like, what have I been doing? I've been missing out on all this fun. Broke up with that boyfriend and just, went full force at college. But I was, young and resilient, and I could still get up and go to class. And I didn't feel different from anyone else because everyone was drinking so heavily around me in college. And I loved it because it normalized it for me. It was after graduation that things started to shift between me and my friends. I was like, well, I have to go to graduate school because I don't want to go to the real world yet, so got into like a great graduate program, had a kegerator in my room, drank, a lot, went out to nightclubs every weekend, managed to still get good grades. But, again, the latching on to boyfriends and then acting out with alcohol and, just messy personal relationships, like would be in one relationships, get drunk, go out, cheat on the boyfriend, start a relationship with that person without breaking up with the other one. I mean, just like a mess. And this continued, and so after I graduated from graduate school, I had this kind of 2-year cycle where every 2 years I had a new boyfriend, a new city, and a new job. And I thought I was just living the life, I would just cut and run. But, looking back, it's clear we call that doing a geographic, where things get bad enough in one place where you just move to another place thinking you'll start fresh and everything will be fine. Turns out I was taking myself with me each time, was not leaving that behind. And as was touched on earlier, there's a progressive nature to this thing. So the way I was drinking at 20 was not the way I was drinking at 25, was not the way I was drinking at 30. And I did not want to look at that at all. I just wanted to do what I wanted to do, and I wanted to have fun. And, I became really selfish and self-centered. And I made choices in my life to accommodate my drinking. So I would choose partners that drank as much, if not more than I did, because that works a lot better than choosing a partner who's telling you not to drink. I surrounded myself with people who drank like I did, and they became increasingly younger as I got increasingly older because people my age were no longer really behaving that way. And even, I had this one great job opportunity and I didn't take it because they wanted me to work every Sunday morning. And I just knew there was no way I'm going to get into a place of business on a Sunday morning ever. So, and then I started to have kind of physical symptoms pretty early on, probably by my late 20s. My hangovers were just soul crushing. I had almost chronic diarrhea. I was confusing dream with reality. But at the same time, holding it together enough that, I'm still going to work, still paying my bills, still had an apartment, still finding boyfriends. When I think about it now, it could have, I drove drunk all the time, never got a DUI. I drove blind drunk on many, many occasions and just never got caught. So if I had been caught for that, maybe things would have been different, but I just, I kept the negative consequences, the major negative consequences at bay long enough that I could continue drinking. And by this point, I have absolutely no perspective on how much I was drinking, how bad it was. I would occasionally think I should be honest with my doctor sometime and tell her how much I'm drinking because I have a feeling it's more than I should. And then I would go see my doctor and be like, my back's hurting again. Could you prescribe me some of those pills for my back? And then I would wash those down with, bottles of red wine. The truth is I really didn't care about my health. I would joke about it. I mean, I guess I thought I was, that nothing bad would ever happen, or I just didn't care. But I think that my mind and my body needed that stuff so powerfully that I wasn't gonna consider not having alcohol. I would do all the things that they talk about to try to make things better. So I tried acupuncture and Chinese medicine, and I went on retreats and I did yoga, and I switched things up. It was like I would only drink natural wines, gallons of it. I would, not tequila because I had that bad experience on tequila, only, just kind of mix it up. And then I would stop periodically, just to prove to myself that I wasn't a real alcoholic, and I was able to stop and be like, okay, well, I just didn't have a drink for a month, so I'm clearly not an alcoholic. But as soon as I picked it up again, I was right back where I was. And what I had to realize was that it doesn't matter what I'm drinking, how much I'm drinking, or how often I'm drinking. It's what it does to me. So, those periods of me not drinking, I mean, they became smaller and smaller, but that didn't equate to me not being an alcoholic. They say once the cucumber becomes a pickle, you can no longer become a cucumber again. And that was true with me. And so I got to a point where in 2007, I was living in Washington, D.C., had created another implosion in my life. At this time, I was 34 and was thinking, how many more times am I going to do this? And I knew I was drinking a lot. I at that point had been drinking daily for 3 years, mostly wine, but bottles of wine. And I was dating an Australian who that's part of the culture, right? So like you have wine with dinner. But then he would go to bed and get up for work the next morning, and I'd be up like with a bottle of wine on the nightstand, like trying to read my book with one eye squinted. And it became harder for me to work full time. And, so I focused more on my volunteer work and worked less and let him pay the bills. And so I created this catastrophe in my life, wasn't willing to look at stopping drinking because that was the only thing that gave me any relief. I thought my problems are so much bigger than alcohol. Why would I take away the one thing that I enjoy that makes me feel better? So I decided to get a therapist and let them sort me out, pay someone to kind of fix my problems for me. And I had a friend who was actually sober in AA, who's a counselor for alcoholism and addiction, ironically, and was talking to him. And he got me a referral for a therapist in DC. And I went to see her. And for the first time, I was sort of honest with her. I was like, well, I can't, I've created this big problem in my life and I can't even talk to my partner about it. We just have to be drunk every time we even talk about it. And, I feel sick because I'm so hungover. And she saw right through me. And it was the first time that someone very directly, and she's a non-alcoholic member of the professional community. And she looked at me and was like, oh, there's this thing called AA. And I was like, I know all about AA. My mom went there and it didn't work for her. And, I don't want to do that. And there's that whole like higher power thing. I'm not interested in that. And she said, okay. And then the next week I came in and said the same thing to her. I'm so hungover. We can't even talk about the problems. I don't know what to do. And she said, you have got to do something about your drinking. And at that moment, something happened. I had my moment of clarity, like the door kicked open and I became willing. Like I really was willing to be honest and look at my life and say, I might think that I have all these other problems, but the bottom line is like, I can't deal with any of them unless I stop putting alcohol in my body every day. And she said, you can keep coming here and wasting your time and your money, but if you keep drinking, it's going to keep getting worse. And you'll eventually die from this. And so I hit bottom, in that session and became totally willing and said, oh my God, I'm an alcoholic, it was like, I went in there like, I will never do that. I came out like, how do I get to a meeting? And I got to a meeting that afternoon in Washington, DC, and I was crying and I sat in the back and I didn't know anyone and I was terrified and I was shaking. I had less than, 14 hours of not drinking. And it works exactly how it's supposed to. I got my hand up and said, I'm Claire, I'm an alcoholic. And after the meeting, I was surrounded by women, who were offering to help, giving me their phone number. They told me there's a women's meeting here in a few hours. Please come back for it. And I did. And that started my journey to sobriety in AA. And for me, early sobriety was so painful. I mean, so difficult. And that's why they recommend 90 meetings in 90 days, reach out to other women, get a sponsor, start reading the literature. And I had surrendered so completely that I was willing to do all of that. And I did, but it was hard and it was painful, but it was the best thing I ever did. So I took all the suggestions they said. I got a sponsor. I went to tons of meetings. I moved out of the boyfriends. I got a little studio apartment, like 2 blocks away from my AA clubhouse, and just like hardcore for months recovered. I had to ask my parents for help so that I could pay my rent and all of that while I was doing this. So I stopped in time before I didn't need to be medically detoxed. I didn't need to go to treatment. I did really intensive therapy with that therapist a couple times a week. And I did tons of meetings until I started to feel better. And it's a slow recovery. So it didn't always feel great, but as long as you can keep yourself away from that drink, it gets better. And when it gets better, then it gets great. So I'll kind of, I've been with AA ever since. I'm still very involved in AA. I plan to continue to be very involved in AA, mostly to give back so that when newcomers come in and want help, I want to be there to be able to help them. And for me, it's also about emotional sobriety now. So I feel pretty far away from a drink. I mean, I don't want to jinx it, but emotionally, spiritually, all of that, I haven't thought about a drink and I don't know how long. I don't have alcohol in my life. But, continuing to go to AA meetings, I get to share about the resentments, the fears, and what to do with it. You get these tools in AA. And also, I'll just mention that, I stayed out of AA for a long time because of all the things that everybody says, like, oh, there's that like God thing, and you have to do this and that. And it turns out none of that is valid. None of those concerns are valid in my experience. I do have a higher power, but it's of the known world. I don't have a metaphysical higher power. Mine is nature, They say GOD can be group of drunks or good orderly direction. And when I'm in a meeting, I feel that all of us there together are certainly more powerful than I am alone. And so I draw from that power. And it's a benevolent force. We really do want to see each other do well and be happy and be sober. So in sobriety, we talked about, the negative consequences for women. Like I wasn't going to get married and have a kid because I knew I was going to be a drunk mom. I knew it. I knew that I could probably not drink for 9 months of a pregnancy. But after that, I just knew, and I did not want to do to someone else what was done to me by my mom. And I knew that was guaranteed to happen. And so, in the depths of my alcoholism, you don't, I would wake up in bed with people I didn't know. I would wake up in places I wasn't sure where I was. I would be too drunk to know or care if I was using sexual protection. I mean, these are all like pretty severe personal consequences that you have to live with the shame of, the decisions that you made while you were drunk or blacked out. And in sobriety, I no longer worry about my decisions. Like I have a moral compass that operates properly. I still make mistakes, but not ones that carry the heavy consequences. They're ones that I can look at and say, oh, I can learn from that and do something differently next time. So in sobriety, with a couple of years sober, I met my husband. He's not an alcoholic. He's normal, which I don't understand, but it's great. And we got married at 40 when I was 40. And then we had a baby when I was 43. And I feel so grateful that, I recovered. I got my life together in time to have this like wonderful family. And I have, my daughter's 6 now. She's never seen me drunk. She's never seen me checked out. I've never driven her drunk. I'm sure I'll still make mistakes as a parent, but I'm completely present and aware and there for her. And it's just such a joy. So I think that I'll wrap it up. So thanks.
Wow, Claire, you speak with such grace and clarity, and just that was such a beautiful expression of what recovery is all about. Thank you so much for that. Just wonderful. Karen, do you have thoughts? You look like you have thoughts. Anything?
Oh, no, I loved your story, Claire. Thank you very much for sharing. And it's just, I see the power of recovery and, and the gratitude that you are feeling. And that's awesome. Yeah. To be given another chance at life.
Absolutely. And no one could have told me to stop until I was ready to stop. I mean, that's the paradox. Mm-hmm. But we get enough information and, we become willing to make that decision maybe sooner than later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to break the chain of that generational legacy of alcoholism too. It's powerful.
And I want to encourage our attendees to please ask questions at any time in the chat or the Q&A. And we have a couple of advanced questions, but just because Karen just mentioned it, I also wanted to bring up, you said that you hit your bottom sitting in your therapist's office. That is not often where the bottom happens, right? I'm just curious about that. And I know that family members are often on these programs and are looking for that magic sauce. What is it that's going to get in the way of I remember we had somebody sharing the story about his moment of clarity was he'd been living behind a Wawa and his mom let him come in long enough just to take a shower. And that's when they're like, so a shower. Okay. Like that's going to do it for my loved one, and I wonder, Karen, if you could jump in here too, but if both of you could talk about what bottom looks like maybe for different people in your experience that you've observed in your years of attending meetings and hearing other stories, or what bottom really means, I guess.
Yeah, well, I know for me, it was really relationships that had me hit my bottom. I just kept hurting people that love me, and I didn't want to keep doing that. And also, I think it was also the recognition of, after I had that first appointment with the therapist that week, I had a moment where, one of those mornings I said, I just can't drink today. I just need to dry out today so I can, get it together and figure out what I'm going to do. And a few hours later, I'm watching myself pull a cork out of a bottle, and it became clear to me that I no longer could fool myself into thinking that I had choice. Because up to that point, I thought, well, I can stop anytime I want. I just don't want to. But that was like, I was really adamant, like, I cannot drink today. Like, I cannot do this again. I need to dry out. I need to figure this out. And then I'm doing it again. And so I think that was another, like, okay, I no longer have choice here. This is becoming a necessity. And then later that week, I had some friends visiting, and I didn't want them to know how much I was drinking. And I took a 6-pack of beer bottles in a cat food bag up to my bedroom so that they wouldn't see what I was taking up to my bedroom. And then I'm drinking beer. And I'm like, this is my house. I'm an adult and I'm smuggling beer up to my bedroom in a cat food bag, thinking that these people are going to know that. I mean, it was clear that, how unmanageable that was. And that by the time then I went to that next appointment, I was like, okay.
It's a beautiful example of how someone hits bottom, and, everything lining up perfectly to have you, with the therapist helping you to see yourself and to say, it's okay. You have a problem and it's okay. And oftentimes I think, to answer your question, Kim, I think I alluded to this in my presentation that it's, people have had so many moments of that, I swear it off and I find myself drinking again before they actually get help and seek help. And oftentimes it's that one consequence or that one thing, and it could be random. It could be a DUI, or it could be, a loved one who actually got honest with you and in relationship. And I do think the relationship damage is what people feel the worst about. If you have kids or if you have loved ones and you're constantly disappointing them, but then the other opposite thing happens too, where people feel like, my partner keeps getting angry at me, and if you weren't angry, I wouldn't drink. Right. So there's some other things that happen in relationships that actually make the drinking accelerate. But at the end of the day, behind closed doors, someone who has a problem usually knows it, but doesn't know how to tell themselves or someone else. And so it's those things that happen that just, kind of push that to the surface. So bottom can be different for anybody. It could be, handcuffs or, just looking in the mirror.
Right. Absolutely. All right. So I mentioned that there were a few questions that were asked in advance, and I'll just start right off the top. The question is a daily drink or two okay? And I did mention in my piece of the presentation that actually for women, 7 or more drinks a week is considered heavy drinking. But I would like to ask Claire and Karen what your thoughts are about the amount of drinking and when to recognize problematic.
I can only really speak for myself. I mean, there are lots of people in the world that can drink normally. I know for myself, the answer is no. No amount of alcohol is safe for me. They say, one drink is too many and 1,000 is not enough. And that's because if I take that first drink and I get that kind of relief and that warming, and it kind of gets into my brain and does that thing it does, I lose perspective. And, people used to be like, well, what would happen if you had a drink? Like I'm going to turn into a pumpkin or something, I'm like, well, probably nothing right away. It'd probably be fine for a while. I'd make it work. I'd, manage it nicely for a while, but then for sure a point would come where it would start up again, and I would need more and want more. And the consequences would come back, and it would get worse than before. I mean, I see it happen. We see people in AA go out and try to drink again and then come back, and it's just so much worse for them. So for me, the answer, once someone, I think, identifies that they are truly alcoholic and it's, a self-diagnosed disease, only one person can decide for themselves. Unless a court decides for you, whether it's safe for you or not. And for me, I don't mess around. I don't put it into my body in any form.
And, the social drinking is sort of like this 1 or 2 drinks a day for one person could be social drinking. And for another person, like Claire, you have genetic predisposition. So like, I think what's important to look at is what happens when you drink. Do you have, a change in emotion and personality that comes over you when you start putting alcohol into your body? And if you think about alcohol being a slow progression, once you start to drink every single day and you start planning your life around, oh, I'm going to have my drink at this time, at different times in our culture, that was a norm, right? You had your drink after work, but if you could take or leave that drink after work, I would say, well, maybe it's not a problem. But if you're someone who, predicts that drink and plans your life around it, you might want to think about there could be a potential for having a problem if you don't feel like you have one now. So, and there are other cultures that would say, glass of wine with dinner is just fine every day. But I do think we have to watch how much alcohol we put into our systems, because we just don't know who that person is going to be, who later on, after a number of years, crosses that line. So you want to think about how psychologically addicted you are to that drink or two every day.
Great point. Thank you both. Appreciate that. So here's a question. What does it mean when your child stops drinking and starts smoking? Is she working her program and maintaining sobriety? And I believe, and if the attendee wants to correct me if I'm wrong, I believe they're talking about stopping drinking and starting smoking cigarettes, I believe. If I'm wrong, please correct me in the chat. But what do you all think? Is she working her program and maintaining sobriety? Karen?
I'll take it. Sure. I mean, so here's the thing. No one wants to stop using everything. And it's like we were talking earlier about the whack-a-moles. Sometimes people put down one substance that they've been abusing and pick up another one. I can't say that person isn't on her road to recovery. And I don't know that picking up a cigarette or starting to drink is going to necessarily cause a relapse, but it is something that over time could start kind of going into that territory if that person's using it in the same way. Like we went back to thinking about alcohol use as managing feelings. If that person is medicating feelings with smoking, then that person's going to have to look at it. But if it's your loved one, this may be a boundary that you have to make, that her recovery is something that she's responsible for. And whatever she chooses to do, she's responsible for the consequences. And that's a hard boundary to have to make, and to kind of step back from and let her work her recovery program and make mistakes if it is a mistake. And knowing that nicotine is a very addictive substance. So I'm not going to say that it's not, it is.
Yeah, in my experience, I don't know if I sponsor other women in the program, and I've had a number of women who smoked already when they got sober, and the smoking kind of ramped up in sobriety. And, it's a tough one, because it is, my mom died of lung cancer, and she was a dry drunk and smoked her way through dealing with not drinking. So it can be very problematic. But at the same time, we don't see some of the consequences, like you're unlikely to wreck your car if you've been smoking cigarettes. The consequences are different, and they could appear later. And I mean, for me, when you stop drinking, you have to deal with those feelings. It's like you just have to. And to take up smoking is prolonging your ability not to have to face those feelings. And so that's a tough one. When I got sober, I remember talking to my therapist. I'm like, I drink so much caffeine now. Like, I just drank so much caffeine when I got sober. She's like, let's deal with one thing at a time, take it easy. And, eventually you might want to deal with that, but I was just like, oh my gosh, do I need to get off everything? Do I need to, I can't deal with life without sugar and caffeine. And I just needed to take a deep breath and calm down and just take it a day at a time and not have a plan to do anything in particular, except do whatever it took not to drink a day at a time.
And most important, not pick up the substance that the person was addicted to prior to entering treatment. That's the most important thing.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Very helpful. There's a question about, do women resort more to alcohol use than to other drugs? And in our prep for this, we all confessed that we didn't have a clear answer for this. I did a quick little search and I found one resource. It doesn't have a citation, so this isn't cited, but I will tell you what I did find from one resource that said that alcohol is the most commonly abused substance in the U.S., particularly among the female population, being legally and socially acceptable, as we've all talked about. But this all goes on to say that women claim it makes them feel more confident, outgoing, and sociable. For this reason, alcohol consumption is most common among young women in their 20s and early 30s and those who are unmarried. So, Claire, this is your story, right?
Yeah, all of my understanding of it would be anecdotal. I don't know any of the, statistics about this, but drinking sure is widespread among women. And, the fact that it is socially acceptable and encouraged in some cases, and it's available everywhere. I can go to my grocery store and buy alcohol now, it's easy to get. Society approves of it more or less. You have the illusion that it's fancy, or, you feel like you can pull yourself out of your life if you have a certain, like a cosmopolitan or a certain kind of glass of wine or whatever. I have seen, especially in AA, some women then go on to experiment with, cannabis is available in so many different varieties now as gummies and all kinds of stuff. That was never really my thing. It didn't achieve the feeling that I wanted. So I smoked plenty of it when I was in high school when I had boyfriends that smoked it, but it wasn't, alcohol was it started with alcohol and ended with alcohol for me. So I don't know. It seems like alcohol's everywhere. Every time there's a mommy get together, there's wine or something, so I don't know about other substances though.
I would say that alcohol use is probably more widespread than other substances. And again, I haven't researched this heavily, but I will say from my clinical experience that, people who people start to use alcohol earlier than most substances other than cannabis. And nicotine, those two are being used at a younger age, but it's more socially available, like you said, Claire. It's something that people can do at a party. And usually if there's other drugs on board, people are not going to be doing that out in the open. But as someone in long-term recovery, I can tell you that my use started with alcohol and ended with other various substances. So alcohol being more available at a younger age definitely starts the train rolling. Some people stick with alcohol because it's whatever is going on in their life and who they're associated with, then it makes sense. And then if somebody is exposed to other drugs and they try them and they like the feeling of those substances, there can be a crossover. So I don't know that there is a fixed rule of how and why people make those decisions other than availability.
Great. Thank you both. One last question that came in advance was, how likely is it for alcoholism to be passed down from mother to daughter? I mentioned it in the opening slides about genetics, but Claire, you so beautifully described this connection with your mom in this way.
For sure. And it was also from my dad as well. My mom thinks that she drank herself into alcoholism. When I look at my dad's family, it's several generations back. And my brother drank himself to death about 4 years ago, died of cirrhosis and acute liver failure. So I really do feel there's a strong genetic component. Now, my daughter, my husband's not an alcoholic. I'm a thoroughbred, so it will be interesting to see what happens with her. I don't think in her short life so far, she's been given the environment that would make her ripe to become an alcoholic, but whether, once she takes her first drink, experimenting as a high schooler, if she has that kind of experience I had, remains to be seen. So I try to be very in clear terms with her about that her mom's an alcoholic. And then I go to meetings and she, every time I mention somebody new, she says, "Oh, are they an alcoholic?" Because like so many of my friends are alcoholics. And, my hope is that, someday, and I sort of say this to everyone, just know that if you get to a point where you feel like you can't stop, ask for help. Help is available. Recovery is available. You don't have to do it alone. So we'll see. But I do feel that there's a strong likelihood if a mother's an alcoholic that there's a good chance that it could be passed.
Yeah. I love the idea of the women's meetings. I think that's got to at least, ease that social connection a little bit. And I just wondered a lot when you were telling your story about what that felt like for you once you identified yourself as an alcoholic, the way you felt, the way your perception was of your mother's drinking, how that impacted you when you had that awareness. And I wonder how much that had to do with your denial.
Yeah, my perception of my mom's alcoholism has changed so much over the years, especially now that I'm a mom myself and I understand how hard it is, and that she just didn't have the ability. And when she relapsed when I was 14, she said to me, "I'm sorry I did that last night, but I had to." And to me, I heard, "You weren't worth staying sober for." But now I look at her and I think maybe she would have killed herself. Maybe, the alcohol kept her from killing, so I have a lot more compassion for the disease that she carried and, the challenges that she faced. And a greater understanding of what she went through. And I'm also just thrilled that I recovered and then I stuck it out. And then I didn't try to do it on my own or didn't take up smoking to try to not have to deal with, that I've just really absolutely threw myself into it. It was a relief. It's a huge relief still.
Karen?
Yeah, genetic predisposition is definitely real. The one thing that I remember, there was Bill Moyer did a special a long, long time ago. And some of the research that he found was that if 1 in 4 of children, it was like there's a 25% risk for sure. The twin studies definitely supported the genetic predisposition theory. We do think it's a combination of genetics and environment. And the other, I just lost my train of thought. It might come back to me, it might not, but there is a strong genetic predisposition for sure.
Right. And
I wanted to say, yeah, if you, it can skip generations.
Mhm.
So it may go from, a grandparent to a grandchild or, an uncle, a cousin, you want to look across the family, at extended relatives as well, because it's not always a direct mother-daughter connection.
Yep. Right. Let's see. Oh yeah, Judy's reminding me to remind everyone to please take the survey when this ends. But I had one other question I wanted to ask you guys. A couple of questions. AA, we talked a lot about Alcoholics Anonymous. The big book was written in 1935. It is absolutely all about male alcoholics, and then there's like one chapter on women suffer too, and it's not even about so I just wondered if you guys could speak to that. And I happen to love the big book and embrace it fully, but I do I do recognize that this can be a barrier for some women in particular. Anyone want to comment on that?
I can say, when I first came into AA, it was impressed upon me to read the big book with a sponsor because I had, early on, I had one of the times where I swore off drinking, I ordered a big book from eBay and was going to read it on my own and like go to an Al-Anon, and I tried to read it on my own and I was like, whoa, I cannot understand any of this. But it turns out that it's got some really amazing stuff in there. And it really does, if you get through the strange syntax and the old sounding words, and, we would debate in general service, like, do we change it? Do we update it? let's just not touch it. It's perfect the way it is. But you need to go through with a sponsor who can kind of break it down for you. And when you do that, I mean, something really remarkable happens. And so when I take women through the big book, we just get together every week and we read a couple paragraphs and we discuss it. And I give them a little historical context and we talk about it. And then the next week we read some more. So, I mean, it's really kind of the gold standard for how we recover. But you do need kind of a guide to take you through it, in my experience.
I agree. It's a great point, Claire. And one of the things that I recommend to people if they have a hard time with the language of the first 164 pages, which they have not touched since the beginning of the beginning of the writing of the big book. And I think they haven't done that because they just don't want to change the wording because it would change how, the message that's coming across. But the stories in the back are updated in each edition. So the stories, the language becomes more contemporary and it might be easier to follow. If you start reading all of these stories of people who have developed a problem and realized they had a problem and then got some help, then you get that context as well.
And I can recommend 2 other resources that are published by AA. There's a book called Living Sober that helped me a ton when I was new. And it's much easier to understand. And it breaks it down into small, like 1 or 2 page chapters. And it just gives you really practical hints on like, okay, now that you have decided you're an alcoholic and need to not drink, how do you do that? Like, what does that look like? And some of it's like, what do you do when you go to a party? Like, how do you keep busy? How do you deal with the insomnia? How do you deal with resentments? And that helped me a ton in the beginning. So I always encourage newcomers to read Living Sober. And we also have a publication called The Grapevine, which is our meeting in print. And it's a magazine that's filled with stories and jokes. And, it's kind of lighthearted, but it's also about serious stuff. And it's really easy contemporary stuff that can help people.
And there are so many apps and podcasts, and there's so many ways, even if you don't go to a 12-step meeting online or in person, there are so many ways to connect to the community, but please connect, by all means connect. That is so crucial. I like that you brought up a book because maybe if you guys have any favorite books that you have about alcoholism, about particularly women in alcoholism or alcohol use disorder, send them my way and I'll get them loaded on that follow-up page as well. There can be a lot of good stuff out there, I'm sure.
There's a memoir. I'm sure everyone knows it. Caroline Knapp's Drinking a Love Story.
Yep.
I read that about 10 years before I got sober and was like, ooh, that sounds like me. And that really helped me a lot. So the author's name is Caroline Knapp, Knapp, and it's called Drinking a Love Story.
Good one. I'll get that up there.
And Women in the 12 Steps as well.
Okay.
And one of my favorites is The Steps We Took. So if people have difficulty with the languaging and the steps, it just breaks them down. Even more than the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions book does.
Wow, wonderful. Oh, that's I don't have that one. Okay. Oh my God, you guys were amazing. This was such a good conversation. I can't thank you enough. Folks, please take the survey when it comes up. Join us again next week when we're talking about recovery housing. And thank you all for being with us. Really appreciate it. Karen and Claire and Judy, thanks you guys so much. It was a great evening. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Bye, everybody.